Last time on Eye on Yellow Fever,
we vaccinated, 9.8 million people in 10 days.
Tout le monde avait peur au départ, mais...
And we said, oof, Kinshasa was not burned down by the yellow fever epidemic.
Par l'épidémie de fièvre jaune.
I'm Nick Alexander from the World Health Organization's communications team. Back in 2016, against a backdrop of spiraling cases and mounting deaths in Angola and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, scientists raced to prove the effectiveness of vaccinating with smaller doses of yellow fever vaccine.
The experience and our work made me indeed proud, and it was the willingness of everybody to work together to make this a success.
Yellow fever has been with us for 5 centuries, but the vaccine has only existed since the 1940s. In 2016, scientists had brought an outbreak under control with fractionated doses of that vaccine. But something else was now clear. New outbreaks were increasingly likely and could spread across the world. A proactive response was needed, a strategy to end yellow fever epidemics globally.
We thought that we are missing an opportunity to protect 2.5 billion people.
And that is the story we're telling this time. The risk of outbreaks of the deadly disease yellow fever is both significant and growing. This is down to a cocktail of contributing factors, including climate change and increasing pressure on land, greater movement of people, particularly into cities, and a resurgence in our highly connected world of the mosquito species that carries and transmits the disease. Yellow fever may not be the most obvious global public health threat, but it's a disease with no cure and a growing risk that must be taken seriously. We are Eliminate Yellow Fever Epidemics, that's I for short. From the world's most senior public health experts to those on the front line of combating this deadly disease wherever it emerges, we have the inside story on yellow fever's expanding global risk. This is Eye on Yellow Fever. There comes a point in the aftermath of any crisis response where you can look beyond the immediate emergency situation and start to reflect on broader lessons to take into the future. The yellow fever outbreaks in Angola and the Democratic Republic of the Congo depleted the global emergency stockpile of yellow fever vaccine multiple times and resulted in innovative fractional dosing as an emergency measure to contain the virus spread. But what could be done to get out in front of the yellow fever virus in future and even to end epidemics of the disease completely?
Hello, my name is Dr. Sosefal, Assistant Director General for Emergency Response in WHO.
So, Dr. Fall, after the response to the very scary yellow fever outbreak in Angola and DRC, the people who worked on that took that forward, took some lessons learned, and then discussions began on how there could be a global strategy moving forward. Can you talk to us a little bit about what people were thinking and how that eventually came to be the I strategy?
Yes, the discussion started right away after the outbreak in Angola and DRC because we realized that the world was at risk and we didn't have the supply we needed to protect people. And so we started the discussion with a number of partners, WHO, UNICEF, Gavi, CDC, and Gates Foundation. We thought that we are missing an opportunity to protect 2.5 billion people.
Dr. Fall would go on to be one of the key architects of the I strategy. In his early career, his experience and outlook was shaped by his time as an epidemiologist in Senegal, in charge of outbreak control at a provincial level.
I was dealing with so many diseases, including yellow fever.
You said that you knew yellow fever was a risk. How did you know?
If you look at the risk of vector-borne diseases in Africa and worldwide in general, it's very clear. We know exactly where we have the vector. We know exactly where we have the climate condition for yellow fever transmission to happen. So we knew already that the risk was there. But for so many years, nobody was really organizing preventive campaign to protect the vulnerable population. If you know the risk, the next thing to do is prevention. You will not wait to have outbreaks to start responding. Of course, we always have to respond when we have an outbreak, but the first action is when you know there is to make sure that you organize a preventive action to protect the population. At that time, the main threat was really meningitis. If you recall, in 96, the biggest meningitis outbreak in West Africa, where more than 25,000 died from the disease.
So what did you do? What did you and your colleagues do?
So what we have done is to map out the areas at risk, the most at risk for meningitis first, because our primary goal was to stop meningitis outbreak. While doing that, we combined meningitis vaccination with the vaccinations against yellow fever.
Did you learn something from that outbreak earlier in your career that you've carried forward in other yellow fever outbreaks? So that was meningitis, but was there something from that one that you carried forward?
No, it's really important. When you work at global level, you need to understand what is happening at local level. Because whatever the frameworks, the decisions we take at global level, if you are not able to implement that at the most remote areas, you will never succeed. That's why when we talk about global health security, we need to think about local health security, national health security, and this will really bring global health security. But we need to make sure that people who are working at the lowest level, they understand what we need to do in terms of risk analysis, detection, reporting, and rapid response, and prevention, of course.
We talk about the lowest level, but it's actually the first line of response, isn't it?
Exactly. That's why when you talk about global emergency workforce, we start by identifying the need to build frontline responders capacity, because every outbreak starts at community level and will end at community level. What we want is really to be able to perform early detection and rapid containment everywhere we can have an outbreak of yellow fever or other diseases.
By 2016, Dr. Fall has moved from being a regional epidemiologist in Senegal to being the WHO's Africa Regional Director for Health Security and Emergencies. 2016 is, of course, a key year. It's when that major yellow fever outbreak erupts and spreads like wildfire in Angola and the DRC.
It was really, really scary because the first outbreak started in Luanda, the capital city of Angola, and very densely populated. It's only after deep investigation and post-mortem that we were able to identify this as yellow fever. And another challenge was really the laboratory capacity in Angola. We had to ship samples to South Africa and Dakar to be able to confirm the outbreak. And at that time also, we didn't have the air strategy, and the availability of vaccine at global level was very limited. Not having the supply you need to be more preventive was a big challenge. So we were just running after the virus for some time.
2.5 billion people are at risk of yellow fever, meaning they are in areas where there could be the mosquito, where they could catch the disease. Where are those people situated across the globe? Where are the at-risk areas?
If you look at the entire sub-Saharan Africa is at risk for yellow fever. Maybe the less risky place is extreme south, like in South Africa and others. But almost the entire sub-Saharan Africa is at risk. If you look at Latin America and Central America, all those countries are also at risk for yellow fever outbreak. Also in Southeast Asia and in the Pacific region, we have so many countries that are at risk for yellow fever. It means that it's almost everywhere in the southern hemisphere. We have the risk of yellow fever outbreak.
It's a global challenge.
Yeah, a really global challenge.
We'll return later to hear more from Dr. Fall and reflect on the aims and ambitions of the I Partnership. And by the way, if you want to find out more about what we do, just search online for Eliminate Yellow Fever Epidemics. We've also put a link in the notes for this episode, which you'll find in your podcast app. So far, we've talked mostly about the present day, but yellow fever is one of the deadliest diseases to ever affect mankind. Where has it come from, and what's its history? It's worth spending a bit of time getting that context and background. It's thought the disease originated around 3,000 years ago in East or Central Africa when it first made the leap from primates to humans. It spread quickly to West Africa and made the jump to the Americas on slave trading ships in the 1500s and 1600s. It's possible that some of the people on board had yellow fever, but water kegs on slave ships offered perfect conditions for Aedes aegypti, the yellow fever-carrying mosquitoes. Of course, they didn't know that then, and as the decades go by, increasing numbers of port towns and cities across the Americas are devastated by the disease.
Most of the port cities along the coast of intertropical Americas.
We can bring in Dr. Sylvain Aldighieri at this point to help us tell this part of the story. He's responsible for epidemic alert and response at the Pan American Health Organization.
Veracruz in the Gulf of Mexico, Santo Domingo in the Caribbean, La Habana, Cuba, Salvador de Bahia, Recife in Brazil, Guayaquil in Ecuador. Most of these cities were really highly impacted by a cycle of epidemics of urban yellow fever.
Some of the best documented historic cases were in major cities in the United States. In 1793, Philadelphia is beset by a yellow fever epidemic that kills 1 in 10 people. To put it another way, there were 5,000 deaths in a city of 50,000 people. By October that year, 20,000 people had fled the city. New York and Boston were badly affected. In these northern U.S. cities, they became used to a pattern of yellow fever hitting hard in the summer and falling away in the autumn. But again, they don't know why. Around this time, the disease makes its way to Europe, probably also on slave ships, dropping off sorghum or sugar en route back to Africa. 2,200 deaths are reported in the Spanish city of Cadiz. Outbreaks are reported as far north as Glasgow in Scotland. There are massive outbreaks across the Americas. Haiti from the 1790s, Savannah, Georgia in 1820, Virginia in 1855, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and repeated outbreaks in Bermuda. Tens of thousands of people die. New Orleans was a big center for the disease, a major slave trading port with a warm climate. Here, around 26,000 people contract the virus over 2 decades. From 1882 to 1889, French efforts to build a Panama Canal are ended by diseases, including yellow fever. This leads to a huge financial crisis in France.
The people of this time describe the yellow fever, the clinical presentation of yellow fever. In Spanish, Vómito Negro, black vomit. It means people vomiting digested blood, black blood.
Speaking of those earlier days, before we had the sharing of information, before we had the knowledge about the disease, before we had an effective vaccine, all the approaches to vector control, what does history tell us about how people reacted in those early outbreaks when they didn't know where it was coming from and they didn't know how to control it?
It was only common sense. You avoid, during the yellow fever season, living in these areas, but very hot and humid areas. And it's only at the beginning of the 20th centuries, that activities, science-based, evidence-based interventions were developed and implemented and harmonized among the countries of this region.
In fact, it starts in 1888 when a Cuban scientist first identifies that mosquitoes carry and transmit the virus.
With a communication from a famous Cuban scientist, Carlos Finlay, who identified that a mosquito was the agent of transmission of a virus from a person to another. It's a very important step in the knowledge.
U.S. military doctors and others working in Cuba volunteer to be guinea pigs, allowing themselves to be bitten by mosquitoes that had previously bitten a yellow fever patient. It was a scientific step forward that they paid for with their lives.
And unfortunately, their death has provided us with the evidence. But this work has helped a lot in the fight against the yellow fever, because mosquito control activities targeting Aedes aegypti were developed.
Mosquito control programs, improved sanitation, cutting out standing water, and fumigation at times start to reduce yellow fever cases wherever they are applied. This is the basis of what we now refer to as vector control. By the early 20th century, science is starting to develop tools to fight back against the disease. The insecticide DDT is invented, and mosquito eradication becomes the primary method of controlling yellow fever. South African Max Tyler and his colleagues at the US-based Rockefeller Foundation work on developing the yellow fever vaccine. They're successful. Between 1940 and 1947, the foundation distributes 28 million doses of the vaccine. And in 1951, Max Tyler becomes the first Nobel Prize winner to come from Africa.
And now, Dr. Tyler, I ask you to receive the prize from the hands of His Majesty, our gracious King.
Since then, we've come to understand not only that the vaccine is safe and effective, but that one dose will protect you for life. The vaccine, alongside vector control and other measures, has done a great deal to curb the threat of yellow fever. But the 2016 outbreak, which exhausted global vaccine supplies, served as a real wake-up call for many. A group of global partners, the WHO, UNICEF, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the US Centers for Disease Control, members from the ICG, the International Coordinating Group on Vaccine Provision for Emergency Use, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a variety of partners from academia, NGOs, and others came together to set up the Eliminate Yellow Fever Epidemics Partnership.
Yes, the discussion about the health strategy started right away after the outbreak in Angola and DRC.
Dr. Ibrahima Sose Falagain, he was a key member of the group that first set up the I strategy.
We realized that the war was at risk and we didn't have the supply we needed to protect people. So working with our partners, we were able to advocate to increase the supply of vaccine. But this needs to continue. We need to continue investing, making sure that we have vaccine for prevention everywhere. And this 2.5 billion people are protected by end of 2026.
The I Partnership has 3 strategic objectives: to protect at-risk population through vaccination, to prevent the international spread of yellow fever, and to rapidly contain outbreaks, including by shepherding in a wave of new virus diagnosis labs in hotspot areas. The I strategy supports 40 countries involving more than 50 partners. The aim is to use 1.4 billion doses of the vaccine by 2026 and indirectly protect millions more people.
This is really a very important strategy. We have more than 2.5 billion people at risk of yellow fever outbreak, while we have a very effective vaccine that will protect people for life. So we cannot continue to see yellow fever outbreak happening. And this investment is really worth it, because when you have yellow fever outbreak in a country like in Angola, what happened? The entire economy will stop. People will stop traveling to the country because of the risk. And it will take years to catch back in terms of economic recovery. So you protect life, population, you protect the economy, and this is really what we need.
Close to 200 million people have been vaccinated against yellow fever in Africa since I's inception. In 2020, 48 million people were protected in Ghana, Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Uganda despite complications caused by COVID-19. Work is ongoing to optimize vaccine supply and with a network of scientists to better predict where immunization might be needed. A key part of the I strategy is to build greater capacity for laboratory testing across hotspot areas to allow faster confirmation of cases. Why is it so important to have local and speedy diagnosis?
It's so important first to confirm the outbreak. You have some symptoms that can be common to so many tropical diseases. Having a rapid diagnosis is really important to know exactly what is happening. Otherwise, you will be working based on hypotheses, and it can be so many things. And so when you have this rapid confirmation, it will help to guide the investigation and to really identify potential cases and mapping out the areas at risk and organize your response. That's why we were able, in the context of the health strategy, to really increase the number of reference laboratories in Africa and to make sure that even in many countries they can have local capacity to do the first diagnosis. This is really important.
In future episodes, we'll go into more detail on how the eye strategy operates, and we'll break down the important work to protect 1.4 billion people from yellow fever by 2026. Next time, we'll look at how resources can realistically be found while the world is in the grips of a pandemic. How has COVID-19 impacted the global fight against yellow fever?
What we've learned from COVID in a way is a lot of things that we thought were impossible are actually possible.
This is the head of Nigeria's Center for Disease Control, Dr. Chikwe Ihekwazu. He says lessons learned in tackling COVID-19 could stand us in good stead.
There are many things we can do more effectively, more efficiently to get on top of diseases such as yellow fever that have been with us for so long. You can scale up quickly, you can start a response quickly, you can mobilize people, you can release data. And I think more than ever before, we know it can be done because we have seen it done with COVID.
Join us for that next time in Eye on Yellow Fever. If you want to find out more about the eye partnership, search online for Eliminate Yellow Fever Epidemics. You'll also find the link in the notes for this episode on your podcast app. This episode was produced by Dave Howard with research from Amelia Jansen and sound design by Adam Whaley. I'm Nika Alexander. Eye on Yellow Fever is a Bengo Media production for Eliminate Yellow Fever Epidemics.